So we are going to talk about writing a compelling cover letter for faculty roles. This is part of our program called the Faculty Job Search Camp, which is dedicated to finding, this is for postdocs and grad students who are interested in faculty roles or anything on the academic job market. So that's what we're going to talk about. Cover letters specifically for academic cover letters. So we have this whole program called Faculty Job Search Camp that's been happening last week and this week. If you haven't had a chance to check out our programs, please check them out. Use this QR code. We still have some sessions happening today. So we have a session on writing a research statement immediately after my session. And then we have sessions on writing teaching-focused documents like teaching statements, DEI statements, etc. So if you haven't signed up for those, I'd encourage you to sign up. We also have some sessions tomorrow, specifically on if you're interested in applying to the faculty job search cohort, I would encourage you to come to our session tomorrow. All right, so let us get started. My name is Tithi Basu Malik. I'm the Associate Director for PhD Career and Professional Development, which means if you're a PhD student or a postdoc, I am happy to meet one-on-one with you to support any kinds of career questions that you have. So what are we going to talk about in terms of the cover letter? We're going to talk about what is the purpose of a cover letter, what is the general format you want to talk about in terms of a cover letter. We're going to talk about how you want to present your research and how you want to present your teaching. And then we are going to talk a little bit about how you can tailor your cover letter to sort of fit the role that you're applying to. Okay, so what essentially is a cover letter? It is a document that allows you to present a snapshot of yourself as a candidate. So who are you as a whole, right? What are your research agenda? What is your teaching focus? Your past research? What kinds of service are you able to provide to the department? Why are you a good fit for that specific institutions? These are all things that should come across in a cover letter. But very importantly, when somebody is reading your cover letter, they should be able to envision you as a future colleague, doing the research independently, teaching independently. So if that should be one of the primary things that your cover letter conveys. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later, but make sure to convey yourself as a future colleague. A very important function of the cover letter is also to showcase why that institution, why you're applying to that department. Everybody wants to hire somebody that is going to be there long-term, right? Nobody wants to make a short-term hire for an assistant professor role only for them to move on or to figure out it's not a good fit. So you absolutely want to showcase why that specific department is attractive to you, why that area, why that institution, all of those things. Okay. So in terms of a tone, mentioned this already briefly, but you want to write like a colleague. Your tone should be that of a colleagues, not that of a postdocs or a grad students. What do I mean by that? You want to avoid coming across as too humble, right? Oftentimes in cover letters, we see language like, oh, I was so privileged to work with Dr. X. I was inspired by Dr. So-and-so to do my research. While that might be your true feeling, that makes you come across like a grad student or a postdoc. So you want to be direct, you want to be to the point, right? You want to avoid hyperbolic language. You don't want to say, my research was so important and influential. Tell them why it was important. Tell them why it influenced anything in your field. What exactly was the influence? Did you have a lot of publications? Did you have, other people base their research off of your research? Then tell them about that. The main thing to remember is you don't just want to, tell, you want to show. You want to showcase why your research is important. You want to showcase why you are an effective teacher, right? So don't say things like, I have a passion for teaching. I love my students and I want to change their lives. Instead, it's far more impactful to say things like, I taught 2 courses and I came up with a novel technique on how to guide the various teaching sections. I came up with a new technique. I started a new lab. I started a new something. I introduced a new something. That's far more impactful than saying, I love teaching. And of course, you want to showcase your fit. So for example, if you're applying to a teaching only institution or an institution where teaching is the main focus as opposed to the research, you want to showcase your teaching with a lot more prominence compared to the research. In contrast, if you're applying to an R1 institution or an institution where research is the main focus, you really want to talk at length about your research. So keep that in mind when you're sort of writing your documents. Don't have a one-size-fits-all document that you're sending everywhere. Having said this, I'll mention that there are a lot of things which are like discipline specific. So there are discipline conventions. You want to make sure all of the information that I'll provide today are generic across the board because we work with students across 86 disciplines, right? So what you want to do is absolutely make sure that anything that you include in your own document aligns with your discipline's conventions. Okay, in terms of format, what might the format of a cover letter look like? You want to make sure it's no less than 11 font size. So 11 to 12 font size is pretty standard. You want to make use of readable fonts like Garamond, Georgia, Helvetica, etc. Don't skimp on the margins. I know like cover letter is a document in which you have a limited amount of space. Ideally, it should be no longer than 2 or 2.5 pages. So in order to be able to fit everything, the temptation might be to skimp on the margins. Don't do it, because if you do it, the document looks very crowded. And think about it from the perspective of the reader. The reader is somebody who probably is like a professor at the department and has hundreds of applications to go through, right? The moment you're not making it easy for them to read, they might lose interest. So make the task easy. That'll allow you to have a more favorable impression on these people. You want to be clear in terms of your tone. You want to be concise as much as possible. Using a lot of white space allows you to improve readability. The document looks more readable and approachable if there's a lot of white space. So keep that in mind when you're formatting your document. It should not be anything more than 2.5 pages. Again, discipline conventions vary. So in some disciplines, it's pretty standard to have a single page cover letter. In other disciplines, a 2 or 2.5 cover letter is what would be expected. So make sure you're aligning your document with whatever is standard in your discipline. The other thing that you want to make sure is you're writing your cover letter on a department letterhead. If you're at Penn as a postdoc or a graduate student, make sure to reach out to your department, get that departmental letterhead, and write it on that letterhead. This is specific for a cover letter. You don't need a departmental letterhead for your CV or your research statement or anything like that. But for the cover letter, you want to make sure you're using a departmental letterhead. In terms of how you should be writing, make sure to follow the norms of business correspondence. So that means include your own full mailing address. Make sure you have dates off to the left. Make sure you're using formal salutations. Address it to the members of the search committee. Don't say something like to whom it may concern, because then it sounds like you didn't do any research or it was too generic. You have to include a formal sign-off when you're concluding the letter. And when you're in the final or the concluding paragraph, you want to include your openness to sharing additional information or further conversations. So here is a brief sample of what might that look like. Your address, date, the full address of the department that you're actually applying to, the name of the department, and then you address it. All right. In terms of the content, what goes in the content? You want to make sure you have an introduction. You want to make sure you have a body or quite a few body paragraphs, and then you have the conclusion. In the introduction, you have to make sure and correctly state the position that you're applying to. Briefly summarize your qualifications of candidate, who you are, what your main research interests are, and why you're applying to that institution, why you are a good fit. In the body, you want to include information about your research, your teaching, any other relevant information, including service that you have performed as a grad student and that you hope to perform in your role at that institution. In terms of the conclusion, you want to make sure you are expressing your enthusiasm for the role. You are also mentioning that you have additional documents enclosed that they request on the application, and you want to invite further discussion. So I talked briefly about the main contents. Let's talk a little bit more about what goes in the anatomy of a cover letter. What are the different key elements you want to hit upon in the cover letter? Introduction goes without saying, but then this is specifically for STEM. You want to talk about your dissertation or project's overview. You want to talk about your contributions to the field and any publications. The next thing that I mentioned is super important. Don't just stop with talking about all of the research that you have done in the past, but outline what kind of research are you proposing to do at that institution. And the more detailed you can be to showcase that you have a very clear idea of what your research agenda or research plan is going to be, the better it is. Depending on the institution, you want to touch upon your teaching. If it's an R1 institution, keep teaching to a paragraph, particularly for STEM. If it's some combination of research teaching or just a teaching focused institution, you want to give a lot more prominence to teaching. You want to mention service and any diversity related work that you have done, and then you conclude. For people that are in humanities or social sciences fields, you want to talk about your introduction. Some of the stuff is similar to what somebody in a STEM field might do, but where it sort of diverges a little bit is you want to give your teaching a little bit more prominence, even if you're applying to a research-focused institution. And the reason for that is because in humanities and social sciences, teaching oftentimes takes a broader focus. You're expected to teach whether or not you have to do a lot of research. So you want to talk about your teaching approaches and your experiences. What is your plan for teaching at the institution? And then you keep all of the same things. You talk about your service, any diversity-related work, conclusion. So let's talk about specifically the research paragraphs. What goes in it? What are some of the things that you want to talk about? And you want to start by providing an overview of your research. What was the main theme? What was the main question? You want to, if you had multiple research projects, then you want to try and synergize them and identify what were the key elements that sort of tied your various research projects. You want to talk about your main methodologies that you undertook, whether it was for your postdoc research or your graduate work. You want to talk about what were your main findings or what were your main arguments in your work. What were the outcomes and the impact? So you want to talk about any publications, presentations, any media coverages, anything at all like that. If you've received any major fellowships, grants, your work has been funded by anything like that, you want to mention all of those things. And what you absolutely want to make sure to do is you want to talk about why is this research important? How does it contribute to the field? The department where you're applying, they might not have that specific subdiscipline or that specific area of expertise. So you want to go pretty narrow, but you also want to at some point zoom out and say, okay, this is why you should care about my research. This is why it makes important contributions. So let's take a look at a sample to get a sense for what a standard research paragraph or research paragraphs might look like in the STEM field. I'm not going to read all of this. I'm going to give you all 5 seconds to take a look at this before I move on to the next slide. Okay, so hopefully that gives you all an idea of how you might go about structuring the research paragraphs if you're in a STEM field. What about if you're in a humanities or social sciences field? This is what it might look like. You want to, again, talk about your broad research, go a little bit deep, and then talk about why it's important. I'm going to give you all, again, 5 seconds, and then we're going to move on. All right. So in the previous slides, I showed examples of people talking about their current or past work. But what people want to see is envision you as a colleague doing the research. What you have done in the past is in the past, right? What really makes you attractive as a candidate is what are you going to do for them at that institution, which means what is your future research plan? And so it has to be related to your past or current work. You have to be able to showcase why you're prepared to do the sort of research that you're proposing. And the best way to be able to do that is sort of to relate it to your past or your current work, to showcase, I have all of this background, I know this area, I'm an expert in this area, and this is why I'm going to explore A topic, B topic, whatever. Give a broad research direction. Be as specific as possible without being too detailed to the point where nobody outside of your subdiscipline would understand. Because remember, people on the search committee might be across different areas within a department. So make it specific enough, but also like understandable. You want to make sure you're providing a cohesive research agenda, which means even if you have multiple research plans, make sure you're showing what is the uniting theme among them. What you don't want to do is say, oh, I'm going to explore machine learning, and I'm going to explore something entirely different. I'm going to look at power systems optimization. And you're not going to, if you don't show what is the uniting theme or what ties them together, then that is oftentimes a red flag, that this candidate is interested in too many things and might not be able to handle everything. So keep that in mind. Another way to showcase that you're prepared is to provide a timeline. The more specific you can be, the better. If you show like, this is the timeline in which I'll gather my data, this is the timeline in which I will be publishing, all the better for the department. Think about what grants might support it. Specifically, if you're in a STEM field, this is super important. Like, are you going to apply? Is your plan to apply to an NIH grant? Is your plan to apply to an IEEE grant? Like, what is the plan? Are you going to reach out to DOE? If you're in humanities and social sciences, this is perhaps less important, but it's not a bad idea, even if you don't put it in your cover letter, to have an idea of, okay, who are some of the funding bodies who might be interested in this work and might provide the funds to be able to support this research. If there are potential collaborators at the institution, you want to absolutely make sure to mention them. And that again goes on to the topic of like tailoring and showcasing your fit for that institution. You want to tell them why your research agenda complements the department's strengths. Okay, here is a sample example of what a future research direction paragraph might look like. Take a look at this quickly, and then we'll move on. And do not worry, there are examples of all of this on our webpage, so you can find these examples on Penn Career Services webpage. So in terms of teaching paragraph, what are you going to talk about? You want to make sure you're describing any past teaching or mentoring experiences. You want to provide a summary of your general pedagogical approach. You want to give examples of teaching effectiveness. So if you have great statistics from all of your past teaching, make sure to mention them. It's helpful to always mention if you have a specific plan for teaching at the hiring institution, mention those. If you have received any teaching awards, make sure to include them. Guest lectures, if you haven't taught a lot specifically, you want to mention any guest lectures. And if you're in a STEM field and you're applying to, there isn't a lot of teaching expectation, you want to keep your teaching paragraph to a single paragraph. In contrast, if you're in humanities, social sciences, or if you're not applying to a research-focused institution, you want to expand on the teaching a little bit. Here is an example of a teaching paragraph. So in this paragraph specifically, the individual is talking about their past teaching, particularly any kind of their general approach to teaching, any kinds of teaching techniques that they have used, and they're giving good examples to demonstrate anything that they're saying. So you want to do something like this. And I also mentioned, how you want to mention what is your plan for teaching at the institution where you're applying. This would be an example of how you might go about it. All right. So something else that you want to include is mention your service. If you speak to anybody who is an assistant professor, you'll hear them say, I had to do a lot of service. I'm expected to do a lot of service. So mentioning anything you have done at your department or beyond in terms of service makes you stand out as a candidate. So how did you contribute to your department or discipline beyond your scholarly or teaching work? This will give you an edge above anybody else who hasn't done similar kind of work. So if you have done any committee work, or if you have any graduate or postdoctoral governance experience, make sure to include them. If you've done anything in the community to engage them in your research, make sure to include that. If you've contributed to your discipline through work with your national professional association, make sure to include those. Okay, one of the most important elements of a cover letter or any application document really is to be able to tailor. You want to make sure you're tailoring to every institution that you're applying for. And you want to adjust your emphasis on teaching or research based on the role that you're applying to. Look up, research, what is the mission of the institution? Does the department have a different mission? What is their focus really in terms of research? Are they trying to enroll a lot of master's students, grad students? Are they trying to enroll a lot of undergrads? What is their primary thing that they're engaged in right now? Look at the profiles of current faculty members. That will give you a sense of, okay, how much research are they doing? What kinds of grants are they targeting? What could be some potential collaborations that I can propose, etc. Do they offer any programs, labs, certificates? If so, can you mention how you might be able to contribute to them? What courses do they already offer? Because then that allows you to say, oh, I can teach all of these courses, or I noticed that you don't offer this course and I can provide this additional course. So this is what a sample tailored paragraph might look like. And you can include this somewhere on your cover letter. In this specific example, the person is talking about, how they have collaborated with certain faculty members, or how they might be interested in collaborating with certain other faculty members in the future. So if you have those relationships, make sure to include them and showcase them. Okay, so some questions that you might want to ask as you think about tailoring are the following. What are the research and publication expectations of your position? What is your anticipated teaching requirement? Will you be expected to secure funding? What is the role? Does the role have an emphasis on undergrad teaching or graduate teaching? Will you have postdocs or not? How does your strength align or complement the department's existing strength? Who are some of the people that you might be interested in collaborating with? And are there already existing initiatives or research centers, etc., that you want to contribute to? Asking yourself these questions will allow you to have an idea or an outline of how you might want to tailor your cover letter. Okay, so that was basically cover letter writing for academic roles in a nutshell.